To the press conference of the Philippine Statistics Authority para sa 2022 third quarter performance of the Philippine economy ngayong ikasampu ng Nobyembre taong 2022. Ako po si Angie Icardo, ang inyong host para sa press briefing na ito. Ang event na ito ay live streamed sa PSA Facebook page at ang mga updates naman ay tweeted sa PSA Twitter gamit ang hashtag PHGDP. Ikinararangal ko pong ipakilala ang ating mga resource persons para sa press conference ng 2022 third quarter performance of the Philippine economy. Sila ay sina Secretary Arsenio M. Balisacan ng National Economic and Development Authority at si National Statistician and Civil Registrar General Undersecretary Dennis S. Mapa ng Philippine Statistics Authority. Nais din po namin kilalanin ang presensya ng iba pang mga opisyal ng NEDA at PSA na kasama po natin ngayon. Mula sa NEDA, kasama po natin sina Undersecretary Melbourne D. Pana, Assistant Secretary Sara Lynn Daway Ducanes, Director Desiree Joy Narvaez, at Director Nerissa Esguera. Mula naman po sa PSA, kasama po natin ngayon ang OIC Deputy National Statistician ng Sectoral Statistics Office, si Dr. Divina Gracia L. Del Prado. Kasama rin po natin ang Assistant National Statistician for Macroeconomic Account Service under Sectoral Statistics Office. We have here Ms. Vivian R. Ilarina at ang Assistant National Statistician for the Social Sector Statistics Service, si Ms. Wilma A. Guillem. Ngayon, atin na pong pakinggan ang ulat ni PSA Undersecretary Dennis S. Mapa.
Magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Ang Philippine Statistics Authority ay malugod na mag-uulat ng estado ng ekonomiya ng Pilipinas sa taong 2022 third quarter. Ang Gross Domestic Product o GDP ng Pilipinas ay nagtala ng pagtaas na 7.6% sa ikatlong quarter ng taong 2022. Ito ay mula sa naitala na 7.0% sa parehong quarter noong nakalipas na taon. Ito ay pang-anim na consecutive quarter na paglago ng ekonomiya mula sa ikalawang quarter ng taong 2021. Ang Gross National Income o GNI ay nagtala ng pagtaas na 10.5% sa ikatlong quarter ng taong 2022. Gayon din, ang Net Primary Income from the rest of the world ay tumaas ng 94.6%. Sa seasonally adjusted national account sa ikatlong quarter ng taong 2022, ang gross domestic product ay nagtala ng pagtaas na 2.9% quarter on quarter. Sa kabilang dako, ang GNI ay nagtala ng 3.6% quarter on quarter na paglago sa kaparehas na period. Ang mga pangunahing sektor ng ekonomiya na agriculture, forestry and fishing, industry at services ay nagsipagtala ng mga pagtaas na 2.2%, 5.8% at 9.1% respectively. Sa seasonal adjusted basis naman, ang agriculture, forestry and fishing, industry at services ay nagsipagtala ng mga pagtaas na 1.6%, 0.8% at 4.2% respectively sa quarter-on-quarter na basihan sa ikatlong quarter ng taong 2022. Sa ikatlong quarter ng taong 2022, ang per capita GDP ay tumaas ng 6.3% mula sa naitala na 5.6% sa parehong bahagi noong nakalipas na taon. Ang per capita GNI at per capita household final consumption expenditure ay parehong nakapagtala ng pagtaas na 9.1% at 6.7% respectively. Sa naitalang pagtaas ng GDP na 7.6% sa ikatlong quarter ng taong 2022, ang services sector ang nagtala ng may pinakamataas na contribution na 5.8 percentage points. Ito ay sinundan ng industry sector na nagtala ng kontribusyon na 1.6 percentage points, habang ang agriculture, forestry and fishing ay nakapag-ambag ng 0.2 percentage points sa kabuuang pagtaas ng GDP. Sa 16 na sektor ng GDP, ang accommodation and food service activities ay nagtala ng may pinakamataas na paglago na mayroong 40.6% sa ikatlong quarter ng 2022. Ito ay sinundan ng mga sumusunod: other services na tumaas na 38.3%, transportation and storage na tumaas na 24.3%, at construction na tumaas ng 12.2%. Ang mga sektor na may malalaking contribution sa pagtaas ng GDP ay ang mga sumusunod: wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles na nag-ambag ng 1.9 percentage points, financial and insurance activities na nag-ambag ng 0.77 percentage point, at construction na nag-ambag ng 0.76 percentage point. Sa demand side, ang imports of services ay nakapagtala ng pinakamataas na paglago sa antas na 55.2% sa ikatlong quarter ng taong 2022. Ito ay sinundan ng mga sumusunod: export of services na tumaas ng 32.5%, construction na tumaas ng 11.8%, at durable equipment na tumaas ng 11.6%. Sa ikatlong quarter ng taong 2022, ang mga sektor na may pinakamalaking contribution sa pagtaas ng GDP sa expenditure side ay ang mga sumusunod: household final consumption expenditure na nag-ambag ng 5.9 percentage points, construction na nag-ambag ng 1.5 percentage points, at durable equipment na nag-ambag ng 0.7 percentage point. Ang Philippine Statistics Authority ay kinagalak ang inyong pagdalo sa National Accounts Press Conference para sa ikatlong quarter ng taong 2022. Inaasahan namin ang ating muling pagkikita sa ika-26 ng Enero sa pag-uulat ng estado ng ekonomiya sa ika-4 na quarter para sa taong 2022. Muli, magandang araw sa ating lahat.
Maraming salamat po, Yusek Mapa, para sa ulat ng 2022 third quarter performance of the Philippine economy. Ngayon, atin naman pong pakinggan si Secretary Arsenio M. Balisacan para sa pahayag ng NEDA ukol sa 2022 third quarter performance of the Philippine economy.
Colleagues in government, friends from the media, fellow Filipinos, good morning. I am pleased to announce that the Philippine economy maintains its solid position and positive outlook as the government continues to shepherd it toward full recovery and inclusive economic transformation. In this time of heightened global uncertainty and elevated consumer prices, this high growth performance in the third quarter bodes well for our efforts to ensure quality job creation and poverty reduction to achieve inclusive growth. What we want is prosperity for all Filipinos. As national statistician Dennis Mapa mentioned, the Philippine economy accelerated to 7.6% in the third quarter of 2022. The third quarter's GDP exceeded the median analyst forecast of 6.3%. This turnout puts us second in growth in the ASEAN region behind Vietnam's 13.7%, and in front of Indonesia's 5.7%. On a seasonally adjusted quarter per quarter basis, our economy grew by 2.9%, signifying our solid posture against current domestic and external risk. With this, we are on track to achieving the government's growth target of 6.5 to 7.5. Given the latest GDP outturn, our economy needs to grow by 3.3 to 6.9% in the fourth quarter. On the demand side, household consumption and investments were the main drivers of growth. This turnout signifies that Filipino families are close to returning to pre-pandemic life as more people visit restaurants and hotels and engage in recreational activities within the country. On the production side, all sectors sustained their expansion, mainly driven by the growth in the services and industry sectors. We also note the acceleration in the agriculture sector compared to the same period last year. This economic performance largely benefited from the further easing of mobility, including the resumption of face-to-face classes, which boosted consumption among Filipinos. The relaxation of border restrictions and more simplified travel protocols also supported the growth of local tourism and other sectors severely affected by the pandemic, leading to economic expansion in the third quarter. The growth in these sectors, brought by our collective efforts to jumpstart the economy, runs in parallel with the rise in the country's labor force. The unemployment rate significantly declined to 5% in September 2022 from 8.9% in the same period last year. The September 2022 rate is the lowest since January 2020, translating to a decrease of 1.8 million unemployed individuals. I would also like to highlight our education sector. After 2 years of intermittent distance learning during the pandemic, schools reopened for face-to-face classes last August. Such return is vital to preventing further productivity losses that can weaken our future workforce. With these socioeconomic gains, it's clear that the Philippines is on the road to fully recovering from the economic scarring brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. While these developments are remarkable, I want to underscore that our nation still faces a considerable burden in the form of high inflation due to heightened external risk and the brunt of recent typhoons. Let me reiterate, however, that achieving economic growth is necessary but not sufficient condition to achieve our greater goal, which is to reinvigorate job creation and reduce poverty. And as stated by President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., this administration's objective is to reduce poverty to single-digit levels, which requires managing inflation. With that said, let me now go over the government's intervention to address inflation and poverty in our country. Ensuring that Filipino families have an adequate food supply is our top priority. To stabilize the rising inflation and protect the purchasing power of Filipinos, especially the vulnerable sectors of the economy, the government is providing cash transfers, fuel discounts, and other forms of targeted assistance. We are also considering the extension of Executive Order number 171, which significantly reduces tariffs on rice, pork, and corn, thereby enhancing food security while food prices remain elevated. We recognize that the more robust solution is to boost domestic agricultural production. We will do this through more investments in the food value chain and research and development to enhance farm productivity and improve the efficiency of post-harvest processes. Getting government to facilitate private investment in marketing infrastructure, including storage, transport, and logistics, is crucial to achieving durable food security. To sustain agricultural productivity and resilience, the government will continue implementing climate adaptive technologies and further strengthen our value chains. For a much more disaster resilient nation, the government focuses on climate change adaptation measures such as reforestation and coordinated flood or water management across local government units. We will ensure a timely response to address the damage inflicted by extreme weather events in the country. Further, we present the country as a viable and sustainable destination to domestic and foreign investors. To support businesses, we are committed to creating a more enabling regulatory and investment climate. This commitment includes fully implementing landmark reforms such as the amendments to the Public Service Act, Foreign Investment Acts, the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, and the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises, or the CREATE Law. Meanwhile, the revised implementing rules and regulations of the Build, Operate, Transfer Law, which provides for amendments in critical areas such as project approval, disclosures, and government liabilities, are expected to make public-private partnerships more efficient and transparent. These reforms will encourage more private sector engagement and can lead to job creation, improve the delivery of public services, and support infrastructure development. Health is wealth. Hence, the government still intensifying its vaccination program to reduce the perceived remaining threat of COVID-19. In addition, the government is boosting tourism through simplified travel protocols, and this effort will pave the way for more tourist visits and easier return of overseas Filipinos in time for the holiday season. The government is also expanding financial inclusion opportunities for the majority of Filipinos. We are expediting the implementation of the national ID in line with our thrust of digital transformation. We recently released the e-Phil ID, the digital version of the national ID, which is already a sufficient requirement for accessing financial and social protection services. We are also intensifying our efforts to inform the public of the importance of managing personal finances. This week, for example, we at the NEDA are spearheading the observance of the Economic and Financial Literacy Week in recognition of the country's growth potential through financially literate people who make sound financial decisions, mobilize savings, and contribute ideas on improving economic and financial policies. Concerning monetary policy, the government through the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas is closely monitoring and implementing necessary actions to stabilize inflation against global headwinds and movements by other nations, particularly the United States, and their continuing tightening of fiscal policy. All these interventions will be elaborated in the upcoming Philippine Development Plan for 2023 to 2028. Once again, we want to reinvigorate job creation and reduce poverty by guiding the economy toward a high growth path and developing a resilient, inclusive, and prosperous society. This task is an arduous journey indeed. It is an understatement to say that the issues we face are complex, but we are determined. There's no reason to lose hope. Our growth prospects are encouraging. The country is on track to meet the government's growth target for the year. As we collectively strive for a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay para sa lahat. Improving the poor's quality of life will be the center of our recovery and development strategy. We will continue to work together and work hard to turn this vision into reality. And we assure you that no one will be left behind. Thank you and have a pleasant day to all.
Maraming salamat po, Secretary Balisacan. Bago po natin simula ng open forum, nais po naming paunlakan at pasalamatan ang lahat ng press at media partners na kasama sa press briefing na ito. Para po sa maayos na pagsasagawa ng ating open forum, ay narito po ang ilang mga paalala. Para sa ating mga online participants, maaari po ninyong gamitin ang raise hand feature ng Zoom kung nais po ninyong direktang magtanong sa ating mga resource persons. Kapag kayo po ay natawag upang magtanong, pakisabi po muna ang inyong pangalan at organisasyong kinagbibilangan bago po ang inyong tanong. Maaari rin po kayo magpadala ng katanungan gamit ang chat box. Siguraduhin lamang po na nakalagay ang inyong pangalan at organization na kinabibilangan. Panatilihin pong nakamute ang inyong mga mic kung kayo po ay hindi pa natatawag upang magtanong. Para naman po sa mga on-site participants, pakitaas lamang po ang inyong kamay kung kayo po ay may katanungan at hintayin lamang po na kayo ay ma-acknowledge upang magtanong. Kapag kayo po ay natawag upang magtanong, pakisabi po ang inyong pangalan at organization bago po ang inyong tanong. As for the press kits, ipapadala po namin ito sa online media participants via email. Samantala, ang printout po ng press kit ay ibibigay po sa inyo ng aming designated staff para sa on-site media partners. Okay, maraming salamat po. Yun lamang ating mga paalala. Ngayon po ay handa na po tayo para sa ating open forum. Okay, I see Ms. Luella Desiderio from Philippine Star.
Sorry, I don't know if I missed it, but I just want to ask, what is the year-to-date growth? Thank you.
January to September. Our 9 months GDP growth is at 7.7%. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusek Mapa. Okay, ngayon po babasahin natin yung mga tanong na pinadala via Zoom chat. The first question is for Secretary Balisacan. How has inflation affected growth? And how do you see inflation affecting the growth in consumer spending going forward? This is from Ms. Eileen Mencias of Abante.
As we have seen in the third quarter, figures for the third quarter, it's surprisingly quite high, despite the surges of consumer prices in recent months, and the also surges increases in interest rates. So one could only surmise that the performance of the economy could have been higher in the third quarter if not for for those developments. Nonetheless, the 7.7% performance is very respectable compared to the experiences in many countries around the world.
Thank you, Secretary. Okay, we have a question from the gentleman at the second row.
Hi po, good morning. Ralph po from Rappler. Sec RC, GDP beating estimates and corporate earnings now posting double, even triple-digit growth in Q3. How would you describe the state of the economy to the everyday Filipino whose metrics are mainly the rising prices of goods and wages struggling to keep up with inflation? And is Q3 growth considered inclusive? Thank you.
So clearly, as I said earlier, if not for those increases in consumer prices, one would have expected higher economic performance. nonetheless, what we have seen is that the labor market conditions have actually improved. Unemployment rate declined. Okay, and that is a good development. And again, that we expect this to continue. And the only risk that we face is that this, that this increases in prices will persist, and that's why I outlined the responses that government can pursue, no, to avert any negative effects of this, especially in the most vulnerable groups. Remember that also that globally, it's high inflation is a major problem. In many European countries, historically, they are experiencing double-digit inflation, and which they never have experienced for a long time. No? So there are many challenges, both external and domestic. For us, the greater challenge is addressing quickly the adverse effects of natural disasters, no, like the recent five typhoons in a span of a few months, no, that is quite difficult for our fellow men, especially in those in agriculture, no, where damage was quite high. No? So that's why in our Philippine Development Plan 2023-2028, we put a lot of emphasis on resilient growth, making sure that the jobs that we create do not disappear just by strike of one typhoon.
Thank you, Secretary. Okay, the next question will be from Mr. Siegfried Alegado of Bloomberg. Next is the next question. Siegfried. Next, we will entertain the question from the gentleman at the second row.
Hi, good morning, Sec RC, Mr. Mapa. A lot of analysts actually predicted slower growth for the third quarter because of an anticipation of waning effects from the reopening and also waning base effects as we continue to recover from the record slump in 2020. I'm just wondering whether when do you see the effects of reopening sort of normalizing moving forward? What I mean to say is when will GDP its reopening impact on GDP wane, and when will we see a more stable growth number for the Philippines? Or is this the new growth trajectory that we're looking at, number that is above 7%?
All right. I remember that in 2020 we had a very sharp decline in our GDP and in our national income, right? And so one could argue that the growth in 2021, the following year, could be simply base effects. No? The fact that we grew there, you have a much lower denominator, so it's easier to grow. No? But that could not be now the case for the 2022. We have quite a relatively high numbers in the 2021 already. And yet, it's true that we haven't recovered the level of economic activity, the income levels prior to that contraction in 2020. No? Our expectation is that we will fully recover that next year. I'm talking about the per capita income, no? Not the actual level of GDP, but the average GDP per person. So that would take a while. But at the rate we are going, I think even if the economy will grow a little slower next year, as expected again by many observers. I am more optimistic than many of the observers, but even then, I think that will remain to be a country that grows comparatively well among our peers.
Hi, sir. Ramon Randoyan from Philstar.com. Sir, just like to ask why government spending slowed down in the third quarter. Thank you.
Um, yeah, I'm also looking at that because indeed the contribution the of the government in public sector in growth, public investment is lower than in the previous year. I think that's partly because of the much greater attention given to um, the COVID responses. It's not. The construction is still improving a bit. The final consumption is the one of government public sector is the one that grows slower than before. No? Coming from an election year, that is indeed quite surprising because if I look at the data in the previous election years, you would have expected government spending to continue to feel the effects of government spending in third quarter. But that does not seem to be the case. Presumably, the COVID-19 changes the dynamics of political campaigning, for one. But that's for scholars to dig deeper into.
Thank you, Secretary.
It is also possible that government, again, possibly in response to the COVID-19, downloaded its spending much earlier in the first half, and so that's quite less resources already available in the third quarter, and that might be expected also for the fourth quarter.
Thank you very much, Secretary. The next question from Mr. Warren de Guzman.
Hi, good morning, Secretary RC. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to look into financial education. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think you've mentioned that in the GDP report ever or by any other secretary. The reason why I commented on that is because we see from data from the BSP that there's a significant increase in credit card debt and salary loans, and it's possible you see the household growth, spending growth, that it's debt fueled. Are you concerned that it is debt fueled and it's unsustainable?
Yeah, it's normally the case that you're referring to the deepening to the construction of savings, no? Or household savings in particular. That is a typical pattern in when the economy comes down, and first, especially among the poor, what usually referred to as consumption smoothing, when incomes drops, then households dip into their savings to keep at least maintain their level of well-being. But also during when the expectations and the economy improve, also people use draw down their savings to invest, to rebuild their houses, to send back their school children. So there's also the saving there. But again, if we sustain the economic momentum, you would eventually see households replenishing their savings. So it's more or less what we would expect for a country coming out of a deep contraction.
But regarding the increase in consumer debt or credit card, are you concerned about that?
Consumer debt.
Yes.
Of course, if I guess what you have to see is if that debt is rising in relation to incomes, for example, debt of households rising in relation to income. That's not and that may not be sustainable. You have to worry about that. But again, if the economy is or the expectations of the economy improves, and there's, as we can see from the improvements in a number of indicators, an increase in debt temporarily may not necessarily be a bad thing, no? Just like any household or any firm increasing its debt as a proportion of its income, but the expectation is that the incomes in the future will expand so that it will be able to service its debt, then that's not necessarily bad. What's bad is is when you can no longer, you cannot pay your debt, and you are forced to, you know, to let go of productive assets necessary for your maintenance of sources of incomes, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Okay, the next question is from Ms. Ditas Lopez from Bloomberg.
Hi, Secretary. Good morning. Would you say that the peso's depreciation is net positive or net negative for the economy, considering the impact both on imports and remittances, which fuel consumption? Thank you so much.
Again, I said I always maintain that what is bad is or not good for the economy is sharp swings in the exchange rate. Because if you have sharp swings in exchange rate, you can't plan well, no? You can't make particularly investments, and where you would need a sense of security that what you are going into, the contracts that you make, or the conditions and the contracts that you make will not change. No? But if they change and so unexpected, then you probably would not want to make as critical decisions as investment for the long haul. No? So, but on the other hand, if assuming that the economy, that the peso depreciates, and that's along its consistent with the fundamentals of the economy, then I would say that that's good for the economy. A lot of the economy is what we term tradable, no? Those that are sectors that are dependent for exports, and even sectors that are locally serving the population, no? But those sectors, or the products of those sectors, are substitutes of imported products. No? So when the peso depreciates, those imports that are substitutes to that are locally produced then become more expensive, and so there will be more local production that will create jobs, that will create employment opportunities, and so on and so forth. So and the whole, it's beneficial for the economy. So I would not worry too much about depreciation, but I would worry if it's jumped so quickly from 50 to 60, or but if it's simply reflecting fundamentals like your inflation, interest rates, I would not worry.
Thank you, Secretary. Next question from Mr. Warren.
Hello, Secretary, again. I was wondering, since we've already seen a slowdown in government spending, are you more concerned about the impact of high interest rates on government spending moving forward?
Government spending and high interest rates?
Yes, considering again the tight fiscal situation.
As we have seen, we are quite we are planning our fiscal program in a way that they don't lead to a situation that is where spending becomes unsustainable and become risk to our to our investors. Because if those spending are not is not viewed to be sustainable, because we don't have the ability to pay what we borrowed, then those will have implications at interest rates, inflation, and so on. No? So we are monitoring closely, those interest rates, and we adjust our fiscal programs. Also, of course, BSP is monitoring that closely, and we review our program periodically to ensure that we don't go overboard. So at this time, I would think that the interest rates are at the level that they are necessary to help contribute stemming the inflation. But we do know that the inflation is not just a monetary phenomenon now, it's also a supply side issue. So we are looking at those angles. So we don't want, of course, BSP to say, and I don't think that they do believe that the inflation is just a monetary phenomenon, that the only cure is to raise the interest rates. They do recognize that it's also supply push inflation or cost push inflation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Secretary. Okay, we now move on to the questions sent via Zoom chat. This one is for Yusek Mapa. The question is from Ms. Eileen Mencias of Abante. First, what is the comparative 2021 third quarter growth for consumer spending? Second question, what has been the quarterly trend on consumer spending since the beginning of the year?
Okay, for the household final consumption expenditure for the third quarter of 2022, lumago tayo ng 8.0%. Ano? In the previous year, ito ay 7.1%. Now, para naman doon sa seasonally adjusted quarter and quarter for the whole year, yung first quarter natin, ang household final consumption expenditure ay tumaas ng 2.9%. In the second quarter, mababa siya, negative 4.4%. At itong third quarter naman ay umakyat ng 5.7%. So yun yung quarter-on-quarter performance ng household final consumption expenditure sa taon na 2022. Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you, Yusek. Ms. Eileen has a follow-up question. How big is consumer spending compared to other items on the demand side?
Okay, yung household final consumption expenditure natin sa ang ating constant prices, ito ay 73.6% of GDP for the third quarter. At yung first 9 months of the year, ito ay nasa 72.2% of GDP. In terms of amount, ang ating third quarter 2022 household final consumption expenditure in constant prices ay estimated to be about 3.5 trillion pesos out of the 4.76 trillion pesos na GDP. For the first 9 months, umabot ito ng 10.37 trillion pesos over 14.37 trillion pesos GDP. So mga nasa 70-73% ang household final consumption expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusek Mapa. The next question is from Chino Leica of Manila Bulletin. These set of questions are for both our resource persons. What factors contributed to the growth in GDP? And do you think growth is sustainable? What role did the current administration play in ensuring the continuous growth in the near and in the long term?
Well, from a strictly accounting sense, just like what our national statistician showed, no, that the major source of growth from the demand side is is your household consumption expenditure, no? But we also see quite important contribution there of investment, no? Um, as as industry is still quite respectable, but lower than expected. It's 5.8, I believe. No? But they said, okay, so back to the on the demand side, I said the household consumption expenditure was the major source. That has been for a long time a major source of growth, no? For the Philippine economy, and that's part of that is of course due to improvement in economic activity, the easing of mobility that I said allowed households to move around, spend, and of course the incomes are generated from that mobility make it also that possible. The remittances also received by households, no, remained robust during this period. And the sa supply side naman, we showed there that services was a major contributor, and industry, I said earlier, is also a contributor. I was expecting manufacturing to come stronger, but that was not the case. But I suspect that it's still in this stage of adjustment, especially with the breakdown of supply chain, no? And the decrease in external demand. But as things will improve, we would expect manufacturing and industry to contribute more significantly in the future, because we want to address the constraints to investment, to production in the manufacturing sector. Constraints like infrastructure, logistics, high cost of energy, so on, including the ease of doing business. So there you go. So do we expect this? Do we expect this growth? Could we attribute this growth to the president, to the administration? That was part of the question, right? Clearly, remember this, the July to September is already the first quarter of the administration. And way before the quarters, even before that, there was already clear expectation that the President Marcos would become the president. So clearly, the fact that the economy continued to perform and even accelerated in the last quarter suggests a good deal of confidence on the administration, and we are quite pleased to see that. And so will that be sustained? I believe so, with the trust that we are and what we are telegraphing to our investors, that the Philippine economy is open for business. We are listening to our investors and what constraints they face, and we'll do our best to address those constraints so that they can grow and provide the quality jobs for our fellow men.
Thank you, Secretary. Okay, for the next question, this time it's from Ruel Castro of Malaya. The question is for Undersecretary Mapa. In terms of seasonality, hindi po ba ang third quarter ang karaniwang may pinakamabagal na pagdago sa apat na quarters ng taon? Is this big growth for the third quarter a one-off thing, or do you see it continuing in the future?
Sa datos natin, hindi naman napapakita na mabagal yung sa third quarter. Kung titingnan mo yung fourth quarter sa level, yun talaga yung pinakamataas. So baka doon ang comparison. But usually yung pinakamababa is the first quarter, and then mayroon siya pag-angat sa second, and continuous na yon sa fourth quarter. On the seasonally adjusted naman, sa ating time series, hindi naman nagpapakita na third quarter talaga yung pinakamababa. So maybe if you look at the data and compare it to the fourth quarter, because in terms of levels, the fourth quarter GDP is usually the highest. So parang the rest of the quarters are lower. But if you look at it on a quarter-on-quarter basis, walang evidence na mababa yung third quarter. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusek Mapa. The next question is from July Rada of Manila Standard. Again, to Yusek Mapa. Pwede po ba namin makuha ang GDP average in the first 3 quarters?
Kanina sabi ko na yung ating first 9 months average is 7.7%. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusek. Okay, the next question. I see Ms. Shaila Francisco raising her hand. Ms. Shaila?
Sir, to Sec RC, regarding lang po the increase in household spending, maybe you can give us more details sa behavior po ng consumers na tumaas po yung household spending even amid inflation. You mentioned earlier, some consumers were trying to maintain the level of well-being, but how much of a factor is yung revenge spending, especially we're coming off from a pandemic?
I think it's a big factor, you know. We hear people saying revenge travel, because you're having been deprived of mobility for 2 years, you just want to go out and see the world again. I think that mobility was a big part of the story there. So you see that the data indeed show that quite rapid growth coming from spending in restaurants, in services, and travels. Tourism, you see that when you go to the many tourist areas now, you see many more locals. There's not so many foreign tourists yet, but you see those popular tourist spots populated by local tourists. So I think that a good part of that. And of course, if the expectation of the future is, especially in the medium term, is bad, then you probably would not see that kind of spending. That they may still, defer the spending until things become better. But that's, I guess that there is a good expectation, positive expectation about the medium term.
Dagdagan ko lang siguro yung datos sa Secretary RC doon sa household final consumption expenditure. Tatlo yung nag-contribute ng matataas na factors dito sa pag-angat ng household final consumption expenditure natin sa third quarter 2022. Ang una, yung restaurants and hotels. Tumaas siya ng 38.2%. Tapos transport, 20.5%. At food and non-alcoholic beverages, 3.9%. So yung top 2, ito yung related sa tourism, mobility. So ito yung medyo nag-push doon sa 8.0% growth doon sa household final consumption expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you. For the next question, let's call on Mr. Warren de Guzman.
This is for Isaac Mapa and then for Sec RC. Isaac Mapa, can you discuss the export growth? What were the main contributors to that? And then for Secretary RC, can you explain why exports grew even while we were seeing weak global demand?
Sa data natin, yung ating exports of goods and services, for the third quarter, this is about 1.5 trillion pesos. At ang malaki dito ay yung exports of goods na nasa 976 billion, followed by the exports of services na nasa 548 billion. So yun yung hatian. Ang mataas na contributor doon sa exports of goods ay semiconductor. Tumaas siya ng 20%. Yun yung datos na nasa amin ngayon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yusek Mapa. For the next question,
Yeah, may second question si Guzman. What explains for that export performance despite the external headwinds, unfavorable environment for global trade, no? Yung I think that if you look ngayon, top contributors, yung top export natin is semiconductors, electronics and semiconductors, yun ang basically pinaka-major kon natin. Ano? And it grew at 20%. I think that supports the IT and the high demand for IT services even during lockdowns. No? And as the demand for hardwares and other IT-related services, that particular sector is expected to high demand. And our one thing that we do notice is the sources of our destination of our exports is diversifying a bit. It's not just we're not just now depending on our old foreign trade partners, the U.S. and to some extent Japan, but we are also seeing other markets. Yeah. The other thing that is interesting though is the exports of services. That one is quite also resilient, kahit even as the world, the exports of goods contracted, suffered quite a lot during the pandemic. Our exports of services remain strong.
thank you, Secretary. Okay, we will now accommodate the questions sent via Zoom chat. The next question is from Ruel Castro of Malaya. This is for Secretary Palisacan. Would the growth suggest of people's tempered consumption in the past 2 years due to the quarantine measures?
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier, no? That parang there's now with the opening up the economy and the expectation that the COVID-19 has waned and we are now moving to normalize. Consumers are simply going back out there, travel, go to restaurants, go to purchased items that they kept postponing, during the duration of the pandemic. So I think there's a big part of that story there.
Thank you, Secretary. The next question is from Julay Rada of Manila Standard. Again, this is for you, Secretary Balisacan. Is a revision of the GDP growth target range of 6.5 to 7.5% this year still warranted while taking into account the rising inflation rate?
We will, the DBCC will meet, I think soon, given that we have already had the three-quarter data, to review the performance of the economy and whether such review warrants adjustments in our medium-term forecast, our target. So we'll keep it there for now. But it does appear that achieving our target this year does not seem to be any problem. You only require 3.3% growth in the fourth quarter to achieve the lower range, the lower point of the range, of 6.5 to 7.5. So it's fourth quarter is usually the highest growth rate in a year. So I don't expect that we probably even grow higher than what we have targeted for the entire year.
Thank you, Secretary. Okay, the next set of questions are from Mr. Ted Cordero of GMA News. This is for Yusek Mapa. First question, In peso terms, magkano po ang year-to-date GDP? Second question, how much po sa same period in 2021?
Okay, yung 9 months na GDP natin in current prices, umabot tayo sa 15.57 trillion itong 2022 versus the same period last year na 13.75 trillion. Kaya we have a growth of 13.2% in the current prices. For constant prices, first 9 months, nasa 14.37 trillion versus the 2021 same period na 13.37 trillion, and that is a growth rate of 7.7%. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusek. We have a follow-up question again from Mr. Ted Cordero. Ano naman po ang value ng GDP per capita?
The Q3 per capita GDP at constant prices is 42,680 pesos. At current prices, it's about 46,964 pesos.
Thank you, Yusek. Okay, the next question is from Julay Rada of Manila Standard. This is for Secretary Balisacan. There was a tweeted comment during the Philippine Economic Society's conference about why the Philippines is not on the radar screen of American businessmen, unlike Vietnam. It is said that the main concern about the Philippines is corruption, not currency valuation or anything else. Now, going forward, how do you see the issue of corruption, which has hounded the Philippines since time immemorial, going to affect the economy's potential growth?
Okay. I think this what I have all of us who joined the president's trip to New York, where we had the opportunity of sitting down with the top executives, CEOs, owners of big companies in the U.S. We did not hear anything at all that suggests that they are not optimistic in investing in the Philippines. In fact, they expressed so much optimism, and they also express interest in getting more information from our the Department of Trade and Industry for investment, location, opportunities, and so on. No? So there's a good deal of opportunities. In the previous years, yeah, that might be the case. That there was indeed a kind of a wait and see attitude. You know what happened then. You know, our former president did not go at all to the U.S. and listen to what investors need for the Philippines. And so I think there's a great deal of interest, and we listened to the issues that they raised about what we would need to do, and a lot of things that we heard are problems about logistics, infrastructure, particularly the high cost of our infrastructure, the deficits in our infrastructure, like they even raise issues like our airports. You need to improve, which is of course offered an opportunity because we then told them then come in, invest in those infrastructure. We need your investment there. So contrary to the claims that they are not the Americans are not interested in investing in the Philippines, that's not the impression that we get, especially even talking with the American community here and the American ambassador. I think that they are happy to hear from us that we are opening the Philippines for business and that we are uh, providing more opportunities for investors by relaxing restrictions. As we have said, we have amended the Public Services Act. We have amended the Foreign Investment Act, which will now allow more space for investment, and our investors like that. And so I think that there's a big deal of optimism. Whether we are actually we're actually realizing that now is uh, is of course dependent on other factors like the ongoing global trade regime, you know, and the high interest rates everywhere. You know, things like that. But I think as the world normalizes, I believe we'll have our fair share, and we'll need to address the issues that are known even to us, no, as constraints to foreign investment and
Thank you, Secretary. Okay, before we accommodate Mr. Warren de Guzman, let me just inform you po that we only have a few minutes remaining for this press con, so perhaps our resource persons can still accommodate last 3 questions po. Okay, so Sir Warren.
Uh, Thank you. For Secretary Balisacan again. Sir, would you say that the economy will be able to withstand even higher interest rates, given that we already saw a near 14-year high in inflation in October? And would the economic team actually be more open to that if the BSP says they need to hike rates even more than the 75 basis points that they're going to do next week?
yeah. Well, you know, our interest rates are the future values of our interest rates are likely to depend on our trading partners' interest rates, particularly the U.S. No? So we cannot afford not to adjust when, say, the interest rates everywhere is, or particularly in a major country like the U.S. Prices, no, because if we don't adjust, then we may just, you know, be seeing outflow of investment away from the Philippines. So we have to take that, balance that long-term view and any short-term consequences of such higher interest rates. Now, if it will come to that, no? Nobody knows for sure how at this time, no, how far the U.S. will go in terms of its tightening, monetary tightening. But whatever that is, we cannot afford not to adjust with the rest of the world. While of course mindful that as interest rates go, it could have ramification on our economy by way of investment or consumption. But we have to find other tools that allow us to moderate or even temper the effects of those on our firms or on households and so on. For example, of course, if that will lead to the high inflation that we are seeing lately, for example, we all understand that that's not all due to monetary expansion. That part of that is really supply side supply side issues, and we need to do our part in the executive branch to address those issues, particularly ensuring that the most vulnerable groups in our population will not suffer the disproportionate burden of the adjustment.
From Ms. Curry, Cator of CNN.
Good morning po, Secretary. Earlier you mentioned po the eased mobility, travel, and even the reopening of face-to-face classes influencing the economic growth. Pero overall, hindi po ba yung higher prices of food, fuel, basic goods, and even the weaker peso reduce the purchasing power of consumers, especially na nag-accelerate din po yung inflation in the third quarter?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, no, of course, the economy could have and consumption could have even been stronger if not for the inflation. But still, the economy expanded quite strongly and consumption expanded quite strongly. So the high prices might not have completely dampened the that desire to go out and spend. Perhaps because on the employment side, they see opportunities for incomes, no? Income generation. So I guess it's not completely, a decrease in real income and purchasing power out of a given income, but the incomes are also being generated because the economy has opened up, increasingly opened up. There are now more job opportunities. So yeah, but the bottom lines, of course, is that the economy could have been stronger if not for this inflation. But again, we are comforted by the fact that naman na hindi na across the world, hindi na lang naman tayo nag-iisa nito, but it's everyone has their own particular sets of vulnerabilities, and sa atin napaka-vulnerable tayo sa disasters, no, climate change, typhoons, no, which many other countries don't have. So that tells us, actually, I find it quite amazing then. Despite all this difficult times, the economy managed to grow that strongly. I was even prepared to see a reduction in growth in the third quarter, but I think that there's much more resiliency there, but still we need to invest more into resiliency.
Thank you, Secretary. Okay, the last question is from Ms. Eileen Mencias of Abante, sent via Zoom chat. For the first question, this is to Yusek Mapa. When was the last time GDP grew this high? And for the second question, this is for Secretary Balisacan. Economic growth was stronger than expected, even if government spending was not as big. Maaari po bang bawasan Maaari po bang bawasan ng pamahalaan ang gastos sa infrastructure at gawin po itong ayuda sa mga tao at subsidiya sa mga maliliit na negosyo?
I'll take the first question. Yung 7.6 na third quarter, itong kung nakikita nyo yung ating performance, lalo na nung pandemic, hindi naman ito yung pinakamataas. Marami tayong mga 7. In fact, nung first quarter of this year, 8.2 tayo, followed by 7.5, and then yung 7.6 ngayon. Naalala nyo, doon sa second quarter ng 2021, tayo ay pumalo ng 12.1% dahil masyadong mababa yung pinanggalingan naman in the previous year. So not really high, the highest this group of quarters. But yung first 9 months na 7.7, yung kabuuhan na, we experienced this last 2010 pa, yung 7.7 first 9 months growth from our time series data. Thank you, Eileen.
Okay, the question for me was this spending na kung would it be better for government to reduce the spending on infrastructure and devote more for ayuda. Okay. I think it's a balancing act, no? Two things. We want to ensure first that we want to ensure that in the near term we are able to address effectively the impact of this scarring is the scarring that resulted from the pandemic and the inflation that we are seeing today. But in the process of addressing that, the other challenge is ensuring that you do not compromise the longer term prospects of the economy. That passing through this stage of difficulties will be able to create those high quality jobs, will be able to offer avenues for poverty reduction. Because after all, it is that what you aim for, we aim for, no? So now, I said earlier that one of the most defining constraints to investment and growth is the big deficits in our infrastructure. That's so easy to see if you travel across the region in our neighbors. No? You go to Indonesia, you go to Vietnam, you go to Thailand, and you see how backward and it's costly our infrastructure, like transport, no, compared to our neighbors. And that's precisely what the investors that we met in the U.S., in Singapore, in Indonesia, and even early on during my first term at NEDA, that it is a crucial determinant of that decision for investors to come in. Okay, so you want to address that. You cannot afford not to continue making that progress. Okay, so we have to be more imaginative in funding that infrastructure development while taking care of our current needs, particularly among the poor in the short term, no? In the near term. Our response is, you can do much more. You can achieve more with the given amount of resources we have for ayuda if we can only target and deliver those properly to the most needed groups, most vulnerable groups. We have 200 plus billion pesos in 2023 budgeted. And when you made the calculation on how much, if you can target perfectly ayudas to the most deserving so that those who are below the line, poverty line, can move at least to the line, our calculation is that's only roughly about 113 billion pesos. But that assumes perfect targeting. May ibigay mo lahat, walang leakage, no? Those who are not deserving will not receive the ayuda. Yun eh. If we can focus on improving that, I think we can do well. Then that's why we are ramping up the digitalization, the national ID, because that will help us ensure that we reduce and we can improve our ability to deliver the ayuda to the most deserving, most vulnerable groups. I think many of you here probably experience in your own village, you may not be poor, but you get the ayuda anyway, right? Because you did not have a good delivery mechanism. You do not have a database, a digitalized system that allows the poor to receive the money without going to intermediaries like your barangay kapitan or the town mayor or whoever. So yun. I think we can do a lot with what we have if we can improve our delivery system.
Thank you, Secretary, and thank you, Yusek Mapa. And with that, we close our open forum. Nais po namin muling pasalamatan ng ating mga resource persons, Secretary Arsenio M. Balisacan at Undersecretary Dennis S. Mapa. Maraming salamat din po sa mga opisyal ng NEDA at PSA na kasama po natin ngayon. Gayon din po sa ating mga media partners na nakilahok sa press conference na ito ng PSA para sa 2022 third quarter performance of the Philippine economy. Unang Nobyembre taong 2022. Sana po ay patuloy po ninyo kaming suportahan. Maaari po ninyong bisitahin ang PSA website sa www.psa.gov.ph for more updates. Muli, ako po si Ange Aicardo mula sa PSA. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat.